Has the world forgotten about the plight of the Rohingya? Bangladesh says it's run out of resources for the hundreds of thousands of refugees it's hosting, and it's now calling for their safe return to Myanmar. But given the situation there, is that possible? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. It's been 8 years since more than 700,000 Rohingya were forced from their homes in Myanmar, facing a campaign of mass violence, arson and sexual violence at the hands of the military. The Muslim-minority Rohingya fled from Rakhine State in the country's west into neighbouring Bangladesh. It's where a Rohingya community, now estimated at 1.5 million people, lives today in the world's largest refugee camp. But Bangladesh and aid agencies say the nearly decade-long humanitarian operation is simply unsustainable. They're warning that severe funding shortfalls could push the crisis to breaking point. So what's hampering efforts to repatriate more than 1 million refugees? Can world powers exert greater pressure on the military junta to stop the violence? And what have been the implications for Bangladesh? We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first this report from Michael Apple.
8 years ago, hundreds of Rohingya villages were wiped off the map in western Myanmar, and the mass exodus of the Muslim minority group began. Hundreds of thousands of people fled, what the UN would later call a textbook case of ethnic cleansing at the hands of the military. They headed for the safety of Bangladesh across the eastern border, and it's here, in Cox's Bazar, where they've remained ever since. But Bangladesh is buckling under the strain, with only 36% of its joint UN funding target of close to $1 billion met. Its interim leader convened a conference appealing for more funding and an end to the crisis.
We urge all parties and partners to work hard for charting a practical roadmap for their speedy, safe and dignified, voluntary and sustainable return to their homes.
More than 1 million Rohingya live in Bangladesh, in the largest refugee camp in the world, where 32,000 babies are born each year. An agreement to facilitate their repatriation to Myanmar has been in place since 2018, but many say they don't want to return to a country that doesn't recognize them as a people or ethnic group. And civil war continues to rage in Myanmar. The Rakhine Army, an armed ethnic group fighting as part of an alliance against the military, has made recent territorial gains against the army. But it also stands accused of committing mass atrocities against the Rohingya.
We are such an oppressed community. We are asking the world for justice. The government of Myanmar tortured us. If Bangladesh wants to send us back to Myanmar, we want equal rights like other ethnic groups.
In March 2022, the United States, under the Biden administration, made this declaration.
Members of the Burmese military committed genocide and crimes against humanity against Rohingya. Reports of these abuses are widespread, they're well documented, they've occurred in states across Burma.
In tandem with grappling with the refugee crisis, the world's top court is dealing with the question of accountability. A 2019 genocide case brought by the Gambia against Myanmar is inching its way through the International Court of Justice. Oral hearings on the merits of this potentially precedent-setting genocide case are scheduled for later this year. Michael Apple, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's discuss this further with our guest today. In Jakarta, Yasmin Ullah, Executive Director of the Rohingya Maìyafuìnor Collaborative Network and a human rights activist. In Dhaka, we have Farah Kabir, the Country Director of ActionAid Bangladesh. And joining us from London is Abbas Fayez. He's an independent South Asia researcher with a focus on Bangladesh. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us here on Inside Story. In our report, we heard the words of the interim Bangladeshi leader, Muhammad Yunus. He was speaking on what's now become known as Rohingya Genocide Remembrance Day, marks the day 8 years ago when the violence against the Rohingya community in Myanmar led to 700,000 people at least coming across the border. The number now in Cox's Bazar, I think, is estimated at anything between 1.3 and 1.5 million people. Farah, you have just, I know moments ago, come back from Cox's Bazar. Just explain to us, paint a picture. What are the conditions there like for people?
Thank you for inviting me. It's very difficult to be confined in a very small area, 1.3 million people. I don't think words can explain. And it's they're living in bamboo shades, temporary shelters. It's very difficult to ensure the facilities, like sanitation, water. So all of us, with all the good intentions for the last 8 years, have been trying, and I must appreciate how the Rohingya refugees are resilient. But every now and then, in fact, every year, they're told that the funds are going to be cut. And this year, it was pretty difficult when we were all informed that even the food allocation, the emergency allocation, could be cut to less than half. So
Farah,
there's a tension.
Sorry, Farah, we'll come back to the Farah. We'll come back to the food in a minute. But earlier on in our report, we described it as the world's largest refugee camp. I've also seen it described as 33 different refugee camps. I mean, they're all intertwined as far as I can see. Does that say something about the scale of the crisis?
Yes. I mean, it's all located in one area. And Cox's Bazar, that was more of a forest area. So it's smaller than one of your cities. But there's 1.3 million people living there. And there are 33 camps. This is defined because of the administration requirements and to facilitate the management of the camp. But you can see the number, and in a very, very small piece of land.
Yasmin, over the past 8 years, there have been very dramatic changes, both in the home country of the refugees, Myanmar, with a coup in 2021 and a civil war, and last year in the host country, Bangladesh, with an uprising there that forced out the long-standing prime minister. But for the refugees, very little has changed in terms of their prospect of getting home. The only thing that's changed is it's got more overcrowded and their conditions are getting worse and worse.
It is correct that the situation has gotten worse and worse. I think that we are not talking about enough about the root cause of why the situation has worsened, and that is the lack of political will from the global powers and the international collective community. It has to do with, constant funding cut, but it also has to do with where the funds go. A lot of the refugee-led and survivor of genocide-led solutions are not taken into consideration, or very little of it has been taken into consideration to support, for example, an alternative model of funding to ensure that people become sufficient instead of constantly relying on humanitarian aid forever, which is not a sustainable solution to begin with. And when we talk about repatriation, a lot of it also has to do with the reason that failed so much is because the states or those who are involved bypass the idea that it has to be safe, voluntary, and sustainable in order to go back. But if root causes are not addressed at all, the Myanmar military junta are still in power, and now adding the Arakan army into the mix are prolonging the genocide against Rohingya by various other human rights violations. We're absolutely not going to ever have a sustainable repatriation of Rohingya.
Abbas, perhaps you could help us with the perspective from the host country of Bangladesh. We've heard at this conference that's been taking place in Cox's Bazar from the interim leader, Muhammad Yunus, the entrepreneur and Nobel laureate. He said he does not foresee any scope whatsoever for further mobilisation of resources from domestic sources. That's a direct quote from him. I mean, do you understand his position?
Well, thank you very much, James. Yes, I do understand his position, because we are talking about a country that has gone through a major political transformation. In the past, whatever happened, I don't know how the funds were actually used, how they were allocated. But since this transformation, the country has paid a heavy price for the transformation. The economy is not actually doing as well, and it is natural after such a big upheaval, big change. The economy is struggling to actually get back to what it was before. So the resources are not there, but this is also the time that the international community should have come to the aid of the interim government in Bangladesh and support them with whatever that is necessary. Definitely with, kind of funds to be given to the interim government, and this have not taken place. The big powers have not done that. The middle powers have not done that, and it is very difficult. So I think, I understand very well the position of the interim government, because they have to govern their country, and this is really a huge burden, and they should not be made to bear this burden alone.
Farah, Abbas there says the international community, this was the moment when they should have stepped up. The opposite has happened, hasn't it? Aid funding for this emergency is being cut. How much of that is down to the United States and Donald Trump's gutting of USAID and cutting its foreign aid spending?
There was a ask for over 900 million, and what was promised was about 300 plus million. And the US is a substantial contributor. It's over 40%. So you can imagine the impact. And as we speak, we were already trying to do maximum with little resources. 150,000 more Rohingyas have come in the last 18 months. And as we were speaking at the conference, there were people, over thousands of them, near the Naf River. So there's been a big gap because of the withdrawal by US. And this is impacting on some of the fundamental humanitarian response, like emergency, water, healthcare, primary education. It is having an impact that is very worrying. And even when we were discussing yesterday, we were told that whatever has been secured as funding will only make it possible to provide this support to the Rohingyas till the end of December. We don't know what's going to happen 26 and beyond. So when a population who's already suffered so much trauma and genocide and violation are constantly under threat of not having support, you can imagine. I don't think we can imagine, actually. So it is really difficult, and we're looking for all sorts of alternatives, but it is easier said than done, because resource mobilization of that scale hasn't come through yet.
I read that in the camps, the refugees live on a monthly ration card worth about $12 a day, Abbas, and there's talk of that being cut. I also read a statement that came out from key countries, key Western countries, Canada, the UK, Denmark, Norway, Switzerland, Sweden, the Netherlands, Italy, Finland, France and Australia. They came out with strong words saying an end to all acts of violence and unhindered humanitarian access. But are these hollow words? Because none of those countries are actually increasing their funding for Bangladesh. And in fact, some of them are cutting it too.
Exactly. I mean, they are cutting it, and that is a very serious issue. It is an issue. It is a humanitarian issue. It is an issue that relates to how the families of Rohingya are living, how their children, what is happening to their education, what kind of medical attention they can actually have, because they are human beings like everybody else. So why should they not have access to all these facilities, just simply because they were driven out of their country? But James, if I may say that, I think really the main problem is the failure of the international community to solve the problem, the actual root cause of these problems, which is to force the government of Myanmar to accept the conditions that allows the Rohingya to return to their country. And that is where the major problem is. So the Western powers, middle powers of the world, and also other countries, especially international organizations such as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, all of these bodies seem to have actually failed to understand and to do anything to push Myanmar to actually allow the return of the refugees, or to say it even better, to push China to push Myanmar government for the return of the refugees. So that is the root cause of the problem. And the question is, why have these bodies, Western powers, middle powers, I mean, some of them are actually Muslim countries. Think of Pakistan as a Muslim country. Think of Turkey as a Muslim majority country. Indonesia. All of these countries have not done really enough to put pressure on China, despite the fact that China has major economic activities in all of these countries. And they can use those levers, the three countries that I just mentioned, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Turkey. They can use their political and diplomatic muscles to push China, to push Myanmar to accept a credible process for the return of people to their homeland, for the return of the Rohingya to their homeland. That is not what is happening. And on top of that, the funds are actually being kind of limited, and that means that Rohingyas, they have nowhere to go, and they have very, very little to live on.
Farah, does the interim government in Bangladesh deserve some credit here? Because if you look around the world, everyone is talking about migrants and refugees, including some Western countries. And in some other countries, there may be calls for forcible repatriation. Yet Muhammad Yunus says he wants the safe and dignified, voluntary and sustainable return of these people. So does he deserve some credit there? And do you worry that with international support declining, that down the line, Bangladesh may have to change that position and start pushing people across the border?
Let's hope not. Let's hope not. I think definitely the Bangladesh government is trying, and this stakeholder dialogue was one of those initiatives before the September conference, because Bangladesh has had Rohingya refugees, Rohingyas fleeing over the decades. And in the 90s, 200,000 of them were sent back. Many of them have come back because the environment is not conducive. They have been violated, and it's very difficult for them to continue living. And in fact, right now, there's only 400,000 or 500,000 of Rohingyas left in Myanmar, and a lot of them are in internally displaced camps and concentrations. So I think the Bangladesh government and all of us are putting our best effort to try and keep the agenda of the Rohingya refugees and not only look at the issues of their support, because you can't suddenly come and say that you can have $6 worth of food now instead of $12 worth of food, water, medicine. It's inhuman. It's just doesn't. It's not logical. And then we still have them here, and we have never tried to push them back. So that is definitely something that is Bangladesh deserves. Its people, along with the interim government, deserves to be appreciated for that. But we need action now. We just don't want the rhetorics. We really want to see some action. And let's see in September 30th if there is a resolution in the UN, and as well as the funding scenario landscape changes. I agree with Abbas that what happened to the Muslim Ummah and the rest of the Muslim countries, why can't they put forward some funding to support? I'm sure they have enough to share.
And it's worth mentioning that you would say September the 30th. That's when there is the next stage of this process after the conference that's been taking place in Cox's Bazar. It moves to the UN General Assembly when all those world leaders are gathered in New York to try and get international support together. Abbas, talking about the idea of repatriation, I think we should focus for a moment on what's been going on in Myanmar, because maybe not much has changed in Cox's Bazar, but in Rakhine State, a lot has changed in the last year or so. A decisive military operation in October 2023, Operation 1027 it was called, and now no longer does the military junta control most of Rakhine State. It's controlled by the Arakan army. Is that a good thing or a bad thing in terms of repatriating these people?
Well, that means that the situation is very volatile because we don't know exactly what is going to happen in that state. And when I earlier mentioned that there should be acceptable conditions for the repatriation and return, I would say return in dignity and in with respect to their wishes. So that is really what we are talking about, is that the conditions should be acceptable to the Rohingyas to return. Now, one problem is, of course, the level of violence that is taking place and has been developing in the state. So that has to be, sorted out somehow. There has to be negotiation between the government of Myanmar and people who are appear to be actually taking full control of some of the parts of the Arakan state. So
Abbas, I read really something interesting that in Cox's Bazar, Rohingya are being recruited to go and fight back in Rakhine State, and remarkably, they are being recruited to fight with the military junta against the Arakan army, who, of course, many in Myanmar will see as the liberators. This is just going to make their problems worse, is it not? In Myanmar, at the end of a war, they will be seen as being on the wrong side.
Well, unfortunately, countries that have an interest in what is happening in Myanmar, we are talking about China, we are talking about India. They have shared the situation, the piece of cake. So they are both very happy and comfortable with what is happening in Myanmar. And they will not be actually standing up against the army. So, these countries and also other countries that have an interest in the situation as it is in Myanmar will have a lot of money, will spend a lot of money to actually find ways of using people from within the refugee camps. And this has been happening in the past also. It is happening now, unfortunately. But there is a core majority within these camps who are actually not fighters, and they don't want to get involved in any acts of violence, and they just want to have the conditions to live as human beings, either in Bangladesh or in their own state. And really, I think the focus should be on those people, and they are the ones who actually require support and assistance.
Farah, you heard Abbas there talk about China and India. As a humanitarian, what would you like to see China, India, and also the regional grouping ASEAN, what would you like to see them do now to try and help the situation? And are they the key?
Well, we've got to look at have a two-pronged approach. One is the problem started in Myanmar, has to end in Myanmar, and they need to go back and act there and work with the Myanmar government. But as Abbas was saying, it's become more complicated with the Arakan army taking over the Rakhine State. At the same time, we need mobilization of humanitarian assistance. It should not be up for negotiation every year. These people are human beings, and we, international community, owes it to them. There is more than 50 to 60% young people. 30,000 young babies are born every year. So what are we offering? What are we going to do? And how will we face these young people and the Rohingyas? So they cannot be forgotten. And for China and India, China, we all have said China is a major player, but the ASEAN has also not been very active. And I think the OIC and the Muslim countries, they need to come forward and put some pressure as well in the name of Ummah and Muslim Brotherhood.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed to our guests today, Yasmin Ullah, Farah Kabir and Abbas Fayas. If you missed any of the discussion, it's OK. You can see the programme again at any time at our website, aljazeera.com. As always, we want to hear from you. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or find us on X. Look for @AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bays, and all the team here, please stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.